And
Yep.
that's just a very unfortunate position to be in, to have to pay two ransoms within
Yeah.
the span of 2 weeks.
Yeah. When you're talking about a small rural center, like that's a pretty big hit. That can bankrupt a smaller center. So
Exactly. Welcome to the CNL podcast, where we dive deep into the minds of IT and security professionals to uncover their experiences, challenges, and best practices in today's ever-evolving tech landscape. I'm your host, Cedric Lusant, also known as your cyber expert, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Emily Warren, IT Operations Manager at Intuitive Business Solutions. Thanks for joining us today, Emily. How are you doing?
I am doing great.
That's
Closing in
good.
towards the holidays, so I'm excited.
Excited for Christmas and New Year's already? Taking any PTO off?
Yeah, it's the first time in a while I'm actually taking some time off, so I'm excited.
Yeah, sometimes you need that time to disconnect so you can reconnect.
Yep, yep.
So I like to tell my wife, or my wife likes to tell me. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started into the world of IT and security?
Yeah, so I've been in the healthcare vertical for almost the entirety of my career. I started in behavioral health practices, essentially building out internal infrastructure sites for them to essentially navigate and collaborate between different therapists. So
Hmm.
doing setting up interdepartmental referrals, kind of communications and voicing those pieces. And then that segued into more RCM work. And it was kind of interesting. I started in credentialing and enrollment initially, and like I feel like quite a few operations people that transfer into IT. I ended up automating a lot of portions of my credentialing and enrollment work because it was like, hey, this is redundant. Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And so automated some of those pieces, and then the IT department was like, "Hey, well, let's transfer you over." Um,
That's
and so that
awesome.
was kind of my segue more into more focused IT work. I had some really great mentors at Spirian Health, and then ended up moving my career to smaller business, business solutions. So I went from very, very big IT department, bigger company to a much smaller one.
Mm.
And while Intuitive Business Solutions has been around for quite some time, they are definitely smaller, more niche market. And so I really hit the ground running, and essentially it turned Intuitive upside down in a lot of the policies, procedures, migrations to O365. And it's been a journey, that's for sure.
Okay, okay, awesome. And I like that you got into automation earlier in your career. You
Yeah.
identified the redundant work. You're like, yeah, let's find a way to streamline this. What
Yeah.
was that like the specific event or what inspired you to like want to be in the field because you had that redundant work and you wanted to see how could you do it with tech? Like,
So funny enough, I do D&D, and uh, one of my friends did essentially a coding boot camp, and
mhm.
I'm autistic, and so my pattern recognition, just the way I kind of analyze things, he was like, "Hey, you should go download this app. I'm curious to see what your thought process is." And so my introduction into actual coding was Python, and it was a cute little app. I think it was like Code something. I forget what the app was. And so I started burning through those. And he was like, "Oh my God, you should probably dig into this." And so when I was working on one of my projects, it was kind of essentially like scraping off of URLs for specific information. And then I was like, I have an idea. And so then that's where I kind of connected. Okay, let's scrape the NPIs and information that I need, and then I can just put that into a form so that I don't have to manually data entry this. So,
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, that you don't really hear that story a lot from people who weren't in tech originally, but that's very awesome to see that you got your feet wet with Python. You're like, wait, hold up. I could use this to automate all of my busy work. And
yep.
Python was one of the first languages that I was introduced to, but I kind of didn't like it at first. I didn't like it at first. Because I was in school at the time and they kind of forced
Yep.
Java onto us, and that kind of steered me away from programming. But then years later, I came back to Python. I was like, this is wonderful. I can do everything with it. I can run the world.
Yep.
uh, But yeah, that's awesome to hear. So when you're IT operations manager now, right?
Yes.
So I you had to work your way up and do your time in the trenches. Any challenges did you face while you were trying to break into IT and cybersecurity or climbing the ladder?
Definitely earlier on, because I don't necessarily have a conventional degree in,
Hmm.
computer science. My bachelor's and most of my work was actually psychology. So total,
Hmm.
pivot in terms of degrees.
Hmm.
And so that definitely was initially a very big barrier for me. But,
Hmm.
I feel like it's a combination of being at the right company and having the right managers or the right mentors that see that, oh, she gets it and she's proving that she gets it.
Hmm.
And I think that's where it's such a Russian roulette depending on where you land, right? It's I got to find the right place.
Yep, you got to find the people that actually value you, your people, your
Yeah.
tribe. And
Yes.
I can definitely understand that. And what I try to tell people too, because I mentor a lot of people. I run a cybersecurity mentorship training program, and I try to tell people who get discouraged, they're like, "Well, I went to school for criminal justice. I went to school for health administration," and I'm like, that doesn't matter. There are transitional skills from the things that you've learned that you could apply to the field, and you can always find your way in. And it's like how you said, it's about, it's Russian roulette. This is a game of chance. It's about who you know too on top of that and what you know and how you actually apply it, right? So that way the
Yep.
people can see, like you said, that you get it and that you're not just here just trying to chase a check.
Yeah, well, and kind of what I always find interesting is find what you learned within your field and how does it apply. So, one
Hmm.
thing that I've always been interested in and, have kind of talked through is when you're talking about psychology and we're getting into the world of, machine learning or artificial intelligence, that's essentially built off of psychological foundations and scaffolding, right? And
Hmm.
so you start diving in and analyzing, okay, well, how does the scaffolding of a human's brain work? From childhood development and on, how are all those neural connections connected? How do they work? How can
Hmm.
they be used? And then, okay, now translate that, you
Yep.
know?
And
So,
now we've got large language models that are trying to connect the dots for us.
yes,
And it's I say a great time to be alive. We are in unique times, unprecedented times. We are at the cusp of the beginning of the development of AGI. And I
yes,
think within 20, 30 years, we really might have a lot of autonomous agents running a lot of the redundant processes that most humans are helping corporations out with right now. And
yes.
you know, it's
And
it's a
it's
scary
definitely
thought sometimes.
interesting. Well, that's a conversation that, at least my dev team we've had and I feel like that the angst that a lot of, non-technical people are having right now in terms of, oh my God, my job is going to be automated. And one thing I like to remind people is like, yes, AI is, has a lot of flexibility and is applicable in a lot of different ways, but as of right now, from what I have seen in terms of like business process flows, it's very much agentic RAG. It's not necessarily just, oh, I'm going to connect this and it's entirely hands off
Yeah,
and I don't
no.
need a human to audit it. Like, no, there's going to be pruning involved. And that's where we need your understanding of how pairs operate. Is this
Mhm.
normal? The machine's not going to be able to differentiate that, at least not at this point.
Yeah, and what I try to tell people, and we talked about this with Murthy Mantha over at Sentinent Solutions. We had a deep our episode. We had a good hour-long conversation on AI. Yes, there's going to be some jobs that are lost due to AI, and there has been some already, right? But there are going to be way more opportunities created from AI than those that are lost. And it's going to, like you said, it's going to need pruning. It's going to need refining, refactoring, and fine-tuning from a human who understands the business process that you're trying to get the AI to handle. And even
Yeah.
when the AI does get it, it's not, you can't just leave it and fire the person who is, you need someone to manage it overall. So, the AI, what I try to tell people is that, the AI may not take your job, AI may not take your job, but the person who understands how to leverage the AI will.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so definitely, it's a great time to be alive. I feel like, at your role as an IT operations manager at Intuitive, what does a typical day to day look like for you in your current role?
Well, we've gotten to a place now where we're booking out and filtering. So I'm no longer, the person who is like, hey, I need my password reset. So that piece is nice. A lot of those tickets in my bucket have stemmed down. And so majority of my day-to-day is looking at my current stack of projects, what those statuses are, what all of my devs are doing. And then looking at, okay, we're blocking out over the next 5 years. These are the stack of projects. What's the internal infrastructure look like? And where do I need it to be by the time those projects kick off? And so, obviously this last year with Copilot and all of the new API groundings that they've essentially allowed us to use, a lot of our projects, we're looking at connecting to our data via SharePoint and grounding Copilot within those. And so obviously we do have a couple of SharePoints that are external. And so when you start looking at, specific destinations or SharePoint sites that are internal versus external, you also then have to start considering how are those security groups looking,
Yep.
is all your data marked appropriately so that we're not having cross-contamination, especially in the healthcare space where you can't.
Yep.
So it's definitely a lot of crossing I's and dotting I's and crossing T's. There we go.
And my ADHD forces me to mix that one up all the time.
Yep.
I always mess that one up. But definitely very understandable, especially when you're dealing with the healthcare space. You're
Yes.
dealing with, diagnoses, people's personal, private health information that's could be very sensitive, and that gets in the wrong hands either through a hack or just a human mistake blunder because something was miscategorized. Yeah, because nobody did their due diligence is always a bad thing. And then you got to deal with the HIPAA watchdogs, right? So
Yep.
you violate HIPAA, then you dealing with all different types of regulators and auditors to see what went wrong and why, and then you got to worry about remediation costs or whatnot, offering identity monitoring depending on how bad the breach was. Like,
Oh man. Yep.
yeah,
This last year we had to do the risk assessment again so that we could be in compliance. And then we also had our pen test, and it was just like a remediation compliance crazy this last year, which, obviously needs to happen. But, that is one of the biggest flags or the biggest hits in terms of fines is, smaller centers don't necessarily know, or small physician groups like, hey, this is annual. Are you doing this annually?
yeah.
So
Yep.
yeah.
Yep. And I work a lot, primarily throughout my career. I've been working in the healthcare vertical as well as with financial institutions. And on the healthcare side, I'm gonna be real. Majority of the time, a lot of the shops that I do see, their maturity when it comes to their cybersecurity posture is a little bit lacking.
A
Because
little bit.
yeah, I'm trying
I
to be
was gonna say
nice.
that's an understatement.
I'm not trying to call most because some of my clients that I work with that watch this show, I gotta call them a flaming heap of garbage, but just is to varying degrees, right? And sometimes that pen test, right, is the
Yes.
eye opener for them, whether that be for their web application, for their SaaS that they're using to deliver their or facilitate their EMR, their electronic medical records, or for their diagnosis or whatever the case may be, or just their internal networks. Almost 10 times out of 10, when we get into a network, we're able to take it over and see a lot of different risks. And then you kind of get to see exactly where that company has been prioritizing their efforts. And it's always good to bring it to the light. But what's not good is when you come back year after year and you see that, hey, it's still the same stuff. Like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
Like, I get it because we're all busy, and especially with different business constraints. But prioritizing, like I said, you got to prioritize remediation based on the actual risk impact. You go remediation crazy, and sometimes some people get so overwhelmed, some shops get so overwhelmed that they just
But
don't do anything.
yeah, they get used to having the access or availability depending on the staff member, or if it's like a
Mhm.
network, a group of physicians in multiple locations. It can be frustrating. Like, I don't understand why I can't just do this, and having
Yep.
those conversations or kind of changing that thought process can definitely be difficult. So I definitely hear you there. I think in terms of intuitive or how we've couched ourselves, because we do essentially consult. Majority of our clients, they're not large hospital networks. They're smaller, more rural. ASCs, ambulatory surgery centers. And so,
Mhm.
I at least have the benefit of coming in and saying, hey, we can take a look at, your RCM. How's your revenue doing? What are you using for your EMR? Oh, you're on an outdated EMR. Let's take a look at this option.
Mhm.
And so being able to kind of talk through those pieces and then really explaining, hey, this is why I'm, saying you should probably get off that EMR. It's no longer supportive. And
Mhm.
this is why. This is the impact. These are kind of the fees associated. Being able to have those conversations with them and just kind of I'm going to level set with you. These are my recommendations. And then it's kind of a team effort in kind of getting them caught up, or at least
Mhm.
as caught up as possible. And then because of the, wraparound services on the non-IT side, my side of it, it also is a, hey, I can also, by you upgrading these things, we can increase your profits on,
Mhm.
all of the visits and all the procedures that you're doing. And so I guess I have a little bit of a leg up because I can also leverage that piece.
Okay. That gives me a better picture. So you're basically a trusted third party consultant to some of these centers, and you're basically guiding them through like, hey, you need to do this, because this is the impact. And also at the same time, you could save money and make more money, get more ROI if you do this at the same time. So you get to wrap all that up into a
Yep.
bow for them.
Yep.
Okay, that's awesome. So within the industry that within healthcare and the clients that you're supporting, what do you feel is the biggest threat that you're seeing right now in your industry?
Biggest threat is always going to be just the typical employees, man. I mean, I think that is still to this day one of the biggest risks, right?
Mhm.
How's your security provisions? Can your employee on a personal laptop log in? What's your passwords looking like? What
Mhm.
kind of compliance do you have? Are they
Mhm.
enforced? How quickly or how regularly are you auditing those? And then same thing with, IoT devices. I can't tell you how many instances where it's like, oh, you let your claims sit on the printer for a while. Why isn't there a printer box? Why aren't these being held?
Mhm.
And so it's definitely a lot of the smaller things that are definitely some of my biggest headaches, oftentimes.
I can definitely understand that. So what's your philosophy when it comes to balancing, user experience with innovation and security?
I guess in terms of since we're a Microsoft shop, I will say that Microsoft does a pretty nice way of tying things up in a bow for you between Intune and all of the services that they offer, at least for our organization.
Mhm.
And so a lot of those pieces can either with Power Automate flows or different permissions and notifications. A lot of those my team kind of it's more essentially auditing and monitoring, right?
Mhm.
And so that piece is nice. And in terms of what my recommendation is for centers is prioritization. Oftentimes boards, or if they're looking at a capital investor for a specific project that they're doing,
Mhm.
okay, allocate some of that to your security. I mean, taking a look at this last couple of years, all we have heard from the healthcare industry has been data breaches. If that is the biggest thing,
Yeah.
as of right now, it seems like a majority of those data breaches have been bigger networks. And so
Mhm.
something that I've at least told, ASCs is, hey, you guys are smaller. We know your security is not necessarily where it needs to be, but that's something that it's eventually going to start hitting. So that's where you need to be putting your focus.
Yeah,
Um,
and it seems like just the bigger shops get a lot of the attention. And I myself have worked with numerous engagements over the past year with 10 years with some of the smaller shops that don't really get that big media coverage, right? And they're getting breached, they're getting held for ransom, but they're privately notifying their affected patients, right? But like for example, were you following the United Healthcare? I know, yeah, everyone had to hear about that one, right?
yep,
That brought like majority of the healthcare system to a standstill when they got held for ransom. And
yep,
that's just a very unfortunate position to be in, to have to pay two ransoms within a
yeah,
span of 2 weeks.
yeah. Yeah, and for smaller, United Healthcare is a super, super big organization, right? They have a little bit more of that profit that they can allocate to that. But when you're talking about a small rural center, like that's a pretty big hit. That can bankrupt a smaller center. So,
Exactly. Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. That because that those remediation costs and all that. Just a lot of people. It's like I like to talk about the brand damage. What I've seen in the last few years is that I don't think the market really is responding with reputational damage anymore because you see like some of these companies that they have a good stock price, they get breached, their stock price takes probably a couple dollar hits, but then it comes to stabilize back within the next couple of months. It starts to almost feel like, a lot of people are becoming numb to these breaches because they're seeing it left and
It's
right.
so frequent. It's so incredibly frequent. And if your data is not being breached via healthcare, it's being breached somewhere else in some other space,
Yep.
some other industry. And so, that's something I've been kind of interested in just in terms of policy. What is that going to look like? Is the government or policies, laws going to be put in place to where it's not just essentially a slap on the wrist and we'll see how you remediated it in a few years, or if we decide to come back and look.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's going to be interesting. And especially when, one conversation with potential clients I've been having, they'll come, well, what's this buzzword about AI or machine learning? And, or I have clients that'll say, oh, we looked at this, AI for our coding, and it's like, okay, but what questions were you asking? Why did you make sure? Have you taken a look at their BAA? Have you asked for, hey, what's your SOC 1? What's your SOC 2? Are you asking any of these questions? And oftentimes, I think because it's so often dropped as a buzzword, and the general public or populace doesn't necessarily know the right questions to be asking before making that kind of partnership, it definitely puts them at a disadvantage to even know if it's a good idea, you
Yep.
know?
Yeah, especially when that's not your day to day. You're not really gonna understand how to properly do that due diligence for the said vendor or whatnot. And that's where a trusted third party like yourself, or trusted security consultant can definitely help you out. Having the right people on your team who are trusting but verifying, because we have seen time and time again in the industry as a whole where when we lacked the due diligence on our vendors and our third party contractors has come back to bite us in the butt. A
Every single
prime,
time. Yep.
prime example, SolarWinds. And a lot of the guests on the show are like, you keep talking about SolarWinds. Yes, because this is one of the biggest events that I've ever worked in my career. That was an operation that was years long where a piece of software that almost everybody in the world, the major tech shops, the small little mom and pop shops, were using, and somebody compromised that software, put a back door in it, and now had access to everything that software, all the networks that software was deployed to. And at that point, it was ripe for the picking for anybody, for any of those threat actors, right? And
Yep.
I'm not gonna name who we think are responsible for it, but it's definitely nation state level. And when even it doesn't matter if you're a small mom and pop shop, they don't care. And some of these attackers, they don't care if it'll be your last dollar, it'll put you out of business. They
Yeah.
will hold you for ransom and expect you to still pay.
Yes. Yep. It's gonna be interesting. I don't know. I think that's one of my biggest fears in terms of Copilot, and that was one thing that I had talked to a couple of Microsoft when I had gone to their conference down in Florida earlier this year. And it was like, okay, well, I love that you're doing the little workshops and little webinars, but are you being explicit about, hey, yes, you can ground your Copilot in SharePoint, but before you do that and start letting people kind of go nuts and wild playing with this new toy, are you making sure that, all of the admins, the ITs are aware that they need to take a look at that first?
Yep.
And so I will say in a lot of their announcements and at least their webinars, they are starting to kind of cover that.
Mhm.
But that always makes me a little bit nervous. And with any new tool, any new software, it's always a little bit up in the air on
Yeah.
how much people are aware or being
Es-
intelligent in its application and use.
Especially with Microsoft. I've been hacking Microsoft for over a decade. So I've seen a lot of the changes that they've implemented throughout all the different types of attacks that hackers have been uncovering.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna lie to you, Microsoft, they have a lot on their plate. They're the biggest shop that everybody uses, but my faith in that they're covering everything, it's almost zero to none because I know of multiple holes that Microsoft would claim is a feature. They can't do anything about it, etc. And especially like with Office 365, because you mentioned it earlier. Office 365 out the gate, and please, Microsoft lawyers, don't sue me. This is my personal opinion. Out the gate is insecure by default because there's so many default settings that most people, unless you've been an
I'm
O365 admin for some time,
aware of.
you're not
Yes.
gonna know, right? So you have to go through these settings and see, okay, whoa, I don't want this on. Like this is too much permissions, or what's the ramifications of this? And it's like, oh wow. Like for example, did you know that by default, almost any user can register an app? So it's like, hey, that's probably something we want to block out the gate, right? That you think that's something that should be default, but Microsoft is balancing, user experience with innovation and security. So they kind of leave it at the hands and helm of each individual shop. But without that proper education to the people who are running these shops, they're not going to know that
They're not
they
going to
need
know
to
how
do
to train
this.
their staff. I mean, I can't
Yeah.
tell. I had to sit down with my leadership and say, hey, when you're sending a spreadsheet, if you're sharing a spreadsheet, you need to go into the manage access and don't just do what anybody who has this link can view. You need to do it to the individual person. And if you
Yes.
don't want them editing it, then you need to make it view only. And then let me walk through this with you. Let me record it for you. And now let me watch you do it.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so, yeah.
Yep. And even sometimes with my team here, gotta remind them, when you're doing that managed access, especially, in OneDrive, make sure that you're being very explicit on who you want to have access. No
Yep.
blanket access, no blanket groups, the individual users that you want to share this with. So that way we can have some attribution if someone does compromise this link, or if they get access to it through someone's account, we know it's minimized to these specific accounts that
Yes.
could have had access to it versus if you had a URL that anybody can access, then now the scope has just been blown wide
Blowing out the
open.
water. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, well, that's good. That's good. What's I like to ask everybody on the show, what's one piece of advice that you would give to other security leaders?
Don't assume people heard you the first time. Don't assume people understood what you said. I cannot tell you how many times I've been in board prep meetings or in leadership meetings where we'll do an around the room. Okay, is everybody on board? Does everybody understand this? Okay. And then 2 weeks later, a month later, oh, we didn't have that conversation. Or, oh, I didn't understand that this also applied to this. Like, just don't assume would be my
Yeah.
suggestion.
Yep. Always gotta, it kind of goes back into the trust but verify,
Yes.
make sure that people that you're talking to truly have an understanding. And because sometimes you may think they have an understanding and they may not have an understanding and they just don't feel comfortable with explaining that, hey, I don't have an understanding, and they want to go off and do their own research in the end. And there's nothing wrong with that, but and as a leader, right? You got to make sure that your team feels open to be able to come to you and say, hey, I'm not actually sure about this. I got to do research on this. Is there any way, a direction that you could point me in, what you're looking to get out of this, et cetera? So they're not spinning their wheels per se in that category or whatever they're working on.
Yes, yes. I will say, my initial coming onto an intuitive initially, my biggest push, just knowing in terms of risk, it typically is employees, and it's not necessarily intentional. It's mostly due just to ignorance or lack of understanding. That's not their background.
Yeah.
And you don't, to a degree, you don't expect that to be their background, right?
Mhm.
And so, one of my biggest things when I first started or kind of took that helm on was yes, it does take time, but making individual relationships, making sure that you have fostered that relationship where they will send you a ping after the meeting. Hey, can you run this by me again? Or am I understanding this correctly?
Mhm.
I would much rather be bombarded with unnecessary questions because then at least that tells me that they're engaged to a
Mhm.
degree and they're more likely then to listen and follow through.
Yep, most definitely. Versus those who aren't as engaged, and you kind of see that in their work product, and you kind of have to go back and guide them again or redo it yourself sometimes. But
Yeah.
but definitely can understand that. So like let's switch gears here. What's one piece of advice that you would give someone just starting out in their journey into IT and cybersecurity?
Learn everything that you can. I can't tell you how, my first thought process on, what I envisioned as, okay, I'm going into IT and what I envisioned or thought my end goal was going to be, or, my dumb self just assumed, oh, I'm just going to be doing Python and, developing. Totally changed gears. And, had I not sat with and just absorbed as much information as possible, and like, in my brain, whether it was coming from operations, whether it was coming from, experience, cybersecurity team, or whether it was just some of the devs or the architects, data architects, I wouldn't have had all of the pieces to kind of put together to then start pivoting my career to where it is now.
I got you. Yeah, definitely trying to understand exactly wherever you're at, how does it play into the grand scheme of things, right? Because
Yes.
I like to tell people too, my people that I mentor, is that this field is kind of like the medical field. There are so many different niches that you could spend years in one niche and you still won't be an expert in that niche, or you might not even have an understanding of some of the other areas that some of your a deeper understanding of where your colleagues are providing their value and their expertise. So learning everything, trying to get your hands on, learning the foundation of all the domains of cybersecurity and IT, like identity and access management, governance risk and compliance, right? Secure system design and development. Like understanding these things are always going to help you further along in career. And you might never know, because what I tell people too is when you build your foundation in some of these other areas, you might realize I actually don't want to do what I've been doing. Like I want to go do this for now. And then you're able to pivot and build your expertise in that specific area and tailor a plan, the career roadmap that fits best for you. So definitely
Funny
understandable.
that you mentioned that because, while yes, absolutely once in a while I'll pick up a project and start looking at it just to kind of get my developer brain happy. But what I realized was what had initially like the impetus of, oh, this is interesting, that kind of drew me in was kind of the logic puzzle piecing. How do all of these things fit together? And, now the role that I've assumed now, it's that, but on such a much more broader scale, right?
Mhm.
Because I'm looking at third-party softwares. I'm looking at how do I implement this set of data with this set of data, and how does this work together to create this, concept of a project. And so
Mhm.
it's just kind of a different framework of that, I guess.
Yep. And now with you know, with cloud, on-prem, hybrid environments, whether you're a VM shop or you're a K8 shop, there's all different types of technology, all different types of technologies that are getting intertwined and mashed together, and you're trying to figure out how could you do this in the most secure way possible without impeding on, user experience, right? And also trying to make sure innovation is balanced into there. Well, definitely understandable. What do you think are the most important skills for professionals to develop in this space?
In terms of hard technical skills or just in terms of career mobility?
Honestly, that question encompasses both. Some people they say the soft skills, some people say the technical skills. But what do you feel, in your personal opinion, is the most
Soft
important skills
skills,
for a professional? The soft skills.
the soft skills.
I can agree with that. Because
What you lack in technical knowledge, there's always going to be a team player that you can tag to kind of help you fill those gaps
mhm.
on projects. But if you don't have the soft skills to build those relationships, you're not going to get very far.
Yep. And I can definitely agree with that. And I try to tell all of my mentees the same thing. And everyone I've had on the show since I've taken over the show has said the same thing, the soft skills. And the reason why is because the soft skills are going to take you to places where those technical skills aren't,
Yeah.
whether that be working together with different business units, just trying to explain to them, hey, I'm really not just trying to rain on your parade. I'm really trying to make sure that our company is secure as a whole, avoid us from falling victim to certain types of attacks. So we have to have this ever balance. So like when a user is like, why do I have to have a 14 character password? Well, it's because most passwords under 14 characters can be easily guessed and based on dictionary words. So we have to enforce some type of complexity to help prevent the bad guys from being able to get into your account. right?
Yep.
Yeah. So this
Yep.
is like this learning how to tailor those messages and the soft skills. I feel like they've done me the best throughout my career in itself. So I
Yeah.
definitely resonate
With my
with that.
team, we typically like, it's fine. You're going to have a visceral reaction. You're going to have to shove it down. You're going to address the situation. We're going to move through it. And then after you're off of the meeting, you can go scream into a pillow or you can come vent to me. That's totally fine. I get it.
That's awesome that you have a manager that can do that. I really feel like you have to be able to have that kind of open door policy with your team members because you got to be able. You're working in the trenches day in and day out, so you guys got to be able to be candid with each
Yep.
other, right? To really be able to be comfortable and open with each other about any problems that you're facing, and
Yes.
especially when you need help, right? If
Absolutely.
you could go back and give yourself a piece of advice when you were first starting out in this field, what would it be?
Patience. I am very much once I have a bone, I'm not letting go of it. And
That-
I'm very tenacious.
yeah,
And
that's
I
good.
will
It's a good
say
skill. You need that
it is a
sometimes
great
in this
skill.
field. The majority of the time you do.
Yeah, and so, it's kind of interesting, the perspective of soft skills, that is definitely something I had to learn
Mm.
through my career, right? Because, as somebody who's autistic, I can be very blunt and upfront, and I will be very blunt and upfront, with a very happy smile on my face. But, having to kind of smooth out that and, having the patience of Emily, it's okay. I know you want this done now. We're just going to go take some breaths. We're going to take a space away and we're going to go focus on something else. Don't harp on them. We'll come back in a couple of days and readdress it then. And so, yeah, it's definitely the Emily chillax,
I
has been
could
my advice to myself.
I could see it now. You're on the call. I told you guys to patch this yesterday.
Yeah.
Let me stop. But no, definitely can understand that because I'm honestly the same way. I know I'm not autistic, but whenever I get a bone or like if I have something that I was tasked to do with, I'm trying to get it done as soon as possible in the most efficient manner possible. And sometimes when because you work with cybersecurity is a team sport. You're
Yeah.
working together with other people. You can't do everything by yourself. So having those soft skills to make sure you're not putting people off or grinding their gears in the wrong way goes a long way because sometimes like what's that saying? You can catch a fly better with honey than vinegar,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a better analogy that I can use for. And it's really funny you said patience because I kid you not, Emily. My last guest, Michael Maitner, said the same exact thing. Same
Yep.
exact thing. And I ask this question a lot because I want the younger people or people who are trying to transition into this field to really understand that you really do have to have that patience, right? That
Well, and
continuous
especially
learning, the
depending
soft
on,
skills.
whether it's large companies, it's gonna take patience just because the amount of departments and the amount of people things have to go up the chain, right? And
Yep.
then in smaller, spaces, sure, you might not have as much red tape or you might not have as many rungs of the ladder that things have to go up. But then sometimes it's user adoption. Sometimes
Yep.
it's patients having to deal with a smaller organization that perhaps didn't have the IT infrastructure that it needs to be at. And so, yeah, definitely the patience.
Mm. Definitely. Definitely can agree with that. This is a new question. I haven't asked anybody yet, but if you and this is all theoretical and hypothetical. So this isn't legit. This isn't legitimate. But if you could hack into any system in the world, Emily, for good, which one would it be and why?
Would have to say Starlink.
Starlink. And why is that? You want to get free internet out?
No, just curious to see what they're monitoring is all.
What they're monitoring? Everything.
Yes, precisely. But the
Yep,
what?
everything. But I think the Russians beat you to that one though. Seriously though. But definitely could feel that one. So Emily, let's kind of switch gears here. From the tech space. When you're not fighting cyber threats or helping intuitive business solutions out with all the cybersecurity problems, that you're helping your clients out with. Where can we find you? What do you enjoy doing for fun?
I paint. I do a lot of artwork. That's kind of like my brain unplugged time. And if I'm not painting and doing artwork, I'm most likely reading.
Okay. Okay, that's awesome. I do quite a bit of reading myself. I'm doing a lot of reading these days on just building online businesses and whatnot. And my artwork per se, for me is I do a lot of mixed martial arts. So so so,
Awesome.
so I like to fight in a cage at least once a quarter. That's my relief and from all my tech stress per se. uh, but definitely can understand that. I like the artistic side of things. Um, I don't do much painting these days. But when I did, I tried to like do what they call the splash painting, where I would
Oh
just grab
yeah.
the paint and I would try to throw it in different ways to try to make something because I was horrible with always coloring in the lines and whatnot. Like so, my art, whenever I do painting and stuff, is a little bit different. I try to embody my personality, and it's actually gotten pretty popular these days. There's a lot of artists they make great artwork by just throwing paint on a canvas and some.
What I love seeing is like the mixed media, right? There's one girl I saw where she was kind of doing something similar of starting off with a base and just like splashing different kinds of paint on, but then she started incorporating different like multimedia. So like I think she did one with like cement pieces on the canvas, and then she was doing plaster, and like it ended up being super cool, weird 3D paint. Yeah, I don't know what it was, but it looked super, super cool. I was like, ah, that's interesting. I'll have to play around with that.
Yeah, that's a whole nother talent in itself. I follow a lot of Instagram pages that show me those cool arts. So whatever I do, whenever I am frying my brain on one of Mark's apps, I try to make sure it's something that I do like.
Yeah.
But all right, well, thank you so much, Emily, for coming on the show today and sharing your incredible insights and experience with us. It's been a pleasure. I would definitely love to have you on the show again. For our listeners, where can they find you online to connect with you?
Well, I really am not on social media a whole lot. So typically it would just be on Intuitive Business Solutions, and you can shoot me an email.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. Are you on LinkedIn if our guests
I
would
am
like
on LinkedIn.
they like
Yes.
to professionally connect with you?
Mhm.
Awesome. So that'd be Emily Warren with Intuitive Business Solutions on LinkedIn. For those who are just tuning in, again, don't forget to subscribe to the CNL podcast for more conversations with IT and security leaders. But until next time, stay safe, stay secure.
Thank you.